Stories from my life. When life changes you. Stories from my life. Hello, you all. I'm Diana Brienne. Well, you all know I like to share stories from my life. Some of them are funny, some of them are more serious, some of them are a little bit of both. And so this one is called When Life Changes on You. When it changes how you perceive life in the world about you going forward. I think many people have had an event or events that helped shape their future in a positive way, even though that event may have seemed somewhat negative at that time. So this story goes back about 10 years. My children were still relatively small. I think they were like 9, 10, and 11, about that age group. My husband had just got transferred to the state that we live in now. So I was still living in Atlanta area. And I was going to do so for about another year because I had two of my children in public school and one I was homeschooling, and then it became two I was homeschooling. So I've homeschooled intermittently on and off, and usually had one child in homeschool at one time or the other, even though the program that I used was public school done at home, which was an excellent program, and I loved homeschooling. All of my children are now graduated, and they're all in college, and they're doing wonderful. So anyhow, this story goes back to that time period. I stayed behind when my husband moved up to this state, just a little further north in the South. We're still very much in the South. And I stayed for about 1 year because, well, we needed to renovate our house. We were not putting it up at that time to sell, but we were putting it up to rent, and the kitchen needed renovating. And so I was staying for that, and I was staying for the purpose of finishing up that particular year of schooling for my kids. Well, my husband and the boys had gone away on a Boy Scout trip for a couple days, and it was just my daughter and I were there. And this is about, I don't know, mid-July time frame, something like that. And I was sitting in the late evening. My daughter was asleep, and I was talking on the phone. And I heard a noise at the top of the steps. We had like circular steps. Beautiful home, very nice home. And so I told my friend, I said, hey, hold on a moment. I'm going to go see if my daughter's up. And when I went around the corner at the top of the steps, I saw this possum. It was a possum at the top of the steps. And it just stared at me. And oh my gosh, it was the eeriest feeling I ever had. And it wouldn't move. It wouldn't move. And so I stomped my foot, and then it ran back. Never ever saw that possum again. We had possum people come in to look and put traps and everything, but there were no more. It was just that one time. But I believe that possum was sort of bringing me a message of what was going to happen in just a few days from then. Well, during that week, all of a sudden I woke up and I was choking. I couldn't breathe. And so I called my sister. She was a late night person. She would stay up until middle of the night, throughout the night. And so it was always good to be able to know that I could call her. And she said, well, maybe you're having an anxiety attack because, well, my husband was away with the kids and they were on a Boy Scout trip. I said, no, I'm not worried at all. There's no anxiety. I have no anxiety. And so we just chalked it off, and I went back to bed, and I was okay. Well, my husband got back, and he was getting ready to leave to move up to this state. And we had a motorhome, and we had to take the motorhome over to have the steps fixed because my husband was actually going to live in the motorhome for that year. It was a big motorhome, and drive it up here, and he needed that step fixed first. The step would come out, and then it would go back in. And I was to follow him. So that morning I woke up and I said, you know what, honey, I'm going back to bed. My back is bothering me. I've got this pain in the back of my back. Feels like someone's pushing their thumb on my back. And I got my cup of coffee and I was going to head back upstairs when all of a sudden I went down to the floor. I felt myself go down to the floor, so I let myself down. And I went out of it for maybe 30 seconds to a minute. My husband was shaking me. I was clammy and I was cold. And, I guess clammy is the word. And he said, Diana, 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 wake up. And my kids were around and it was very traumatic, experience. I got up, I stood up, my right leg was just quivering, like, just nonstop. I made it into the mother-in-law suite, which was adjacent to the kitchen where my mother, prior to her passing, had lived. And I took care of my mother when she was sick and she had Parkinson's. So anyhow, my leg was quivering, my heart was pounding. It was terrible. I didn't want to go to the doctors, didn't want to go to the emergency room because I'm not a big going to the doctors type of person. And so basically, and this, by the way, this is kind of a muumuu dress, nightgown type of thing. And it has this, it's included in this story. That's why I'm wearing it. It's a very soft material with roses. I paid $1/4 for it when we lived down in Texas at the thrift shop. And it's probably my favorite nightgown that I have. I've had it for almost 20 years. And it's just comforting. It's a comfort piece of, I don't know, pajama wear, but it's actually a dress, that I wear. And I sometimes sleep in it and it's very warm. So anyhow, I got up, I went and laid on the mother-in-law suite bed and I just didn't know what was going on. And a few months prior to that, I had run into a wooden hanger going through the mother-in-law suite. It was dark in there and the wooden hanger was wedged and I plowed right into it with my eye wide open. My eye was remarkably okay, but it knocked me to the floor and it was very traumatic. I thought maybe, something terrible was going to happen. That day I went to the dentist thinking, well, I'd be safe in the dentist chair. And while I was in the dentist chair, the dentist broke the tooth. I was having a wisdom tooth taken out, which I didn't need taken out. It was perfect, but he suggested I get it taken out and he broke it. So I had to have emergency surgery. But that was the day that I had run into the wooden hanger. And so that connects to the story months later. And so my husband needed me to follow him with the motorhome so he could drop it off. But I only got halfway and my leg just kept quivering and quivering. I had to pull over, but I could walk. So I walked, got up into the motorhome, parked the car, and we went to the dealership, dropped the motorhome off, and they had to take us back to my car. And then we all drove home in my car with my husband driving. But I was a mess that day. I didn't know what was going on. And so my husband left a few days later and my symptoms just progressed. I had heart pounding, I had numbness, I had tingling, I had dizziness, my vision was, not right. I would, feel like I was, looking at the floor and it was kind of going two ways and it was just terrible and I had no idea what was going on. So I finally went to the doctor. He said, oh, it's just menopause, you're fine, take a nerve pill. I said, I've never taken a nerve pill and it's not menopause. And he kind of chalked it up to that. So I went back 2 weeks later and told him, I said, I'm still sick. The symptoms are getting greater. I feel weak. I can't sleep. I'm now choking. I started having this choking feeling. So lo and behold, this went on for weeks and weeks. My husband was now gone. I had my 3 little kids and I was very dizzy. And so I pretty much didn't leave home except to walk the children to the bus stop. And I would have to walk them about 6:30 in the morning because the bus came early. And I would wear this nightgown. Can you see it? Can you see it? It's my comfort nightgown, and it just reminds me of walking to the bus stop, praying that I could make it to the bus stop. After they got on the bus, praying that I could make it back into the house and up the driveway. And I did that every day. I was so scared. And my husband would only come home every couple weeks because he really couldn't, and it was about an 8-hour drive. And my symptoms just kept getting worse and worse, but yet I functioned as a mom. I did all my mom duties and I never let my children know that I was sick, but I was scared. Well, in the meantime, we had met this little old man. We knew him for quite a while. We call him the 100-year-old man in orthopedic shoes. He lived in the back of a thrift shop and he went to church all the time and he worked in the thrift shop and kind of was a volunteer there. Anyhow, I knew I needed help, and he was willing to help me. So he would come over, and I would go pick him up with my 3 kids in that big expedition with the 3 rows, and we would load his mattress in, because he had to have a special mattress, and he had to have his special shoes, and he had his little dog with him. And oh my gosh, it was like the Beverly Hillbillies at that point, riding along with all of this stuff. And he'd bring his special food, but he loved to come over to the house because, well, we really didn't have a home, and he was so grateful, and he was so helpful, and he cooked and he cleaned and he did all that, and he was just amazing. But he had his health problems, and sometimes he would fall. So it was like having a 4th child, and that was difficult at times too. And yet he was very happy, and he was very helpful, and it was a great support during that time. And we were having the house renovated, so it was being renovated at the same time. And I went upstairs to take my paintings. As you all know, I have many paintings that I've made, to put them in the attic so that the dust wouldn't get on them during the renovation. Well, while I was in the attic, the floor gave out, and I fell downwards half into the garage. So now I was all bruised up, in addition to all of these other symptoms. Well, I decided that I was going to make boxes for my children because I knew I was sick. I didn't know what it was. It was progressively getting worse. And I was going to different doctors, and they couldn't figure it out. I was, carrying jugs of urine to the doctors every 3 days for them to test it, and, going through cardiac tests and everything. No one had thought of taking a CAT scan, and that comes later. And so, anyhow, in the meantime, I made these 3 boxes up for my kids, and it said, I put all their baby mementos and their little childhood mementos, and I sealed up the boxes, great big boxes, put their names on it, and said, don't open till you're 30 years old, because I wanted them to have those wonderful little baby mementos in case I wasn't around. I wrote them letters, and I did videos, and that's really when I started to build my YouTube channel for personal reasons, not for public reasons, so that they would have these videos to go to. And so that's when all that started. I started doing videos for YouTube just for family and close friends. And then recently it merged into a more public platform. So those early videos are really way back then. And so anyhow, I just progressively got sicker and sicker. And my perspective on life, I would drive around and I would say, you know what, I remember I never had a problem in the world, and now I don't know if I'm going to live. And I was so scared of leaving my kids behind, and I knew I had to make it. Well, I'd gone to the ER, they sent me home. So when my husband was visiting for Thanksgiving, I was so weak I could barely stand up. So in the middle of the night, I drove myself to the ER, sat in the parking lot thinking I shouldn't go in, but I did. Well, prior to that, I had a dream that my mom had come to me, and she told me I had a lesion on the left side of the brain and that they needed to do surgery right away. So I went into the hospital. I told them, my mom came to me in a dream and told me I have a lesion on the left side of the brain. Well, this young doctor was smart enough to take a CAT scan. They had never done one before on me. Out of 16 doctors, no one had thought of it. And so they had the CAT scan, and while I was in the CAT scan, the lady kept asking me what my mom had told me in the dream. And I told her. Well, I got back to the ER, and the doctor came to me and he said, ma'am, you have a lesion on the left side of your brain. You had a form of a brain bleed. We don't know when it occurred, but we really can't do a whole lot with it right now, but we're going to keep you. So they kept me in the hospital. And so that was about 10 years ago. And I'm, of course, perfectly fine now. But during that year, it took me about a full year to kind of, from start to finish, to completely come through it, where I felt healthy again, where I wasn't losing my balance and getting numb and running into walls and bumping into things and tripping over my feet. I had to wear big boots in the house so that I wouldn't hurt my feet, that I didn't run into something. I wore socks on my arms so that if I bumped into something, I wouldn't hurt my arms. If I was baking something, I couldn't feel, I felt numb. I didn't feel if I burnt myself until a couple minutes later. So I had to take a lot of precautions. So basically, they said I had some form of a brain bleed, probably related to when I had hit that hanger, that wooden hanger. And, but it didn't really show for a couple of months. So whatever it happened to be, and, to this very day, I'm not exactly sure, even though they told me it was a brain bleed, a form of an aneurysm. I was very, very lucky to be alive, in my opinion. So now today I take, always taken care of my health and always been into fitness. And I guess it's changed my life in the sense I savor every moment more than I've ever done. I savor every moment. I love the people around me. I don't sweat any of the small stuff, like the saying goes. And I just live life fully, and I enjoy every single moment of my life. And so it did change me, that time period, that traumatic time period. And so anyhow, then we moved to the next state up, and now we're here, and it's all good. And I run 5 miles a day and work out at the gym, and I'm a 62-year-old college student, and my kids are all grown up now. And life is wonderful, and I pray it stays wonderful always. And yet I don't take it for granted. I take nothing for granted, because that was a suddenly. It happened in an instant, and it was a very, very confusing time, and I got through it. I survived it. I believed that I could get through it. I remember prayer candles. I went to Dollar Tree and bought all these prayer candles, and my kitchen was lined with prayer candles because I held on to any hope that I would get well. And I did. I did. So it was a very tough year that changed my life and changed my perspective. I now understand when someone gets sick. I understand how it feels. Up until that point, I was compassionate, but I really didn't fully understand. And now I do. Okay. Well, that's a story from my life, and I wanted to share it with you. A more serious, more somber story. And yet the 100-year-old man was the funny part of it. And so he went on, and he went back to his thrift shop. And then later on, he was pretty old. After we had moved up here, he passed on. But he was a wonderful, wonderful person who had touched my life. And also, I had some neighbors who were absolutely amazing. They were an older couple. I had never really met them until I had gotten sick. Never really talked to them until I had gotten sick, and then they stepped in, and they were so helpful. And yet it was a time that I choose to remember in a good way as giving me the knowing of how precious life is, and to savor every moment, and to love, love, love fully. And I do. Okay. I hope you enjoyed my story. May God bless you. From my house to yours, may God bless you. And I hope to talk to you soon again. And I hope you subscribe. Talk to you then.